We live in a world of stories. I mean, I'm not the only one who really likes a good story. From books to films to news headlines to social media posts, our understanding of people, places, and history is shaped by the narratives that we consume on a daily basis. The only truth we know is our perception of reality. Our idea of ourselves and the world around us is determined by the story that we tell in our own head, and that story is determined by everything that we have consumed, everything that we have perceived. Considering this, the stories that we tell as a public, as a community, as a society, they are more important than ever because information is so vastly available. And in deciding what is true or false, determining what story is being told, therein lies true power. A narrative is defined as an account of events or facts given in order and establishing connections between them, or in other words, telling a story. The narrator, in turn, is the storyteller. And a narrative or a story is not necessarily objectively true because connections and conclusions are drawn by the narrator, who can draw false conclusions or can intentionally try to deceive their audience. Therefore, we know logically to proceed with caution when receiving new information, to analyze, to think critically about the information presented, and compare it to things previously known to determine the information's truth value. However, this is a strenuous process, and instead we tend to be more trusting in nature and sometimes internalize statements as truth without even realizing it. For example, when a fact pops up in your head and you have no idea where it came from. It probably came from TikTok. We do this without even realizing unless there is conflicting evidence readily available. In her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie explores the concept of narrative and examines it in terms of our perception of literature. And she examines the structures of power in place that determine what is being written. Adichie starts her TED Talk in her own childhood, detailing how the stories that she read as a child shaped her young, malleable brain and her perception of literature. How the stories she then wrote as a child reflected this perception and reflected only the British and the American world that she herself only knew by books. She reflects on how it didn't even occur to her until she read her first African author that people like herself could exist in books. That the literary world was in fact not separate from her own, but that she could be a part of it. The power of a story is its inability to open a door to another world that you previously didn't know existed. But if what we call literature is dominated by stories from the economic West, and the stories we read in the economic West are exclusively what we here already know, will we ever learn anything new? Will we ever change? The economic West is in a position of power. Power, to quote Adichie, is not only the ability to tell the story of another person, but to make that story definitive to the other person. The ability to create a single story. And the danger of a single story is that it robs people of dignity and inhibits our ability to recognize our equal human value. Showing Africa as exclusively a continent of starving children, disease, and conflict is a narrative that installs immense pity in people, makes them willing to donate money, willing to help. But it also reduces the whole continent of Africa to a story of despair and reduces its people to something lesser than. In the process of emphasizing our differences, or disparities as we call them, we forget how we are similar. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. When asked about the motivations behind writing her debut novel, Half of a Yellow Sun, and specifically about telling the story of the Biafran War, Adichie said that the need to write about it came from growing up in its shadow. This thing that I didn't quite understand was my legacy. It hovered over everything. History is an academic discipline. It belongs to the elite. It's written by the white man. The colonizer's narrative is generally accepted as an objectively truthful retelling of historic events. In Half of a Yellow Sun, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie shows that history can be written differently. It can be written truthfully. The novel starts in the early 60s in the newly independent Nigeria. Three narrators guide us through the 60s in Nigeria, the prelude to and then the Biafran War. Our narrators include Ugwu, the houseboy to Odenigbo, first introduced by Ugwu as master. Ulana, who abandoned her life of privilege to live another also privileged life with her revolutionary lover, as her sister calls Odenigbo. And finally, Richard, who falls for Olana's twin sister. Richard, the British man who's in Nigeria to write a book, assumes the role of the storyteller. He is initially there to write about Igbo art, but he fails to complete the project. He then attempts to write about the war, but he fails again. In her own way, Adichie shows us that this is not the British man's story to tell. The person who ends up writing the book about the war is instead Ugwu, who the legacy of the war belongs to. And it becomes clear to the reader that Ugwu is our true storyteller. In this moment, Ugwu becomes representative of those who are erased in war. And by giving Ugwu the role of the storyteller and of the writer, Adichie reclaims the power to tell your own history. In the end, narrative shapes not only how we see the world, but how we understand ourselves and others and how we function within it. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's work reminds us that stories are never neutral, and that is the sole reason why they must be told over and over again by different people. They are tools of power and that usually end up in the wrong hands. A single story can distort the truth, or it can clarify it. And the danger of a single story is the domination of a single narrative, determining a definitive, objective truth, because there is no such thing. Ugwu's role as a writer in Half of a Yellow Sun is not only a literary choice, but a political one, because it challenges the supremacy of colonial and Western perspectives by telling the same story from a different perspective. It's the discussion. It's the fundamental pillar of democracy. Are you still writing your book, Sarah? No. The world was silent when we died. It's a good title. Yes, it is. It came from something Kana Madhu said once. Richard paused. The war isn't my story to tell, really. Ugwu nodded. He had never thought that it was.